The wind on Velaris Prime smelled like rotten eggs and burning metal. And Commander Yelthin hated every breath he had to take on this cursed planet. His forearms gripped the scanner tight as he led his survey team through the jagged landscape of black rocks and purple moss. And his secondary hearts beat faster with each step they took toward the ravine. "Stay close," he ordered through the comms, his voice sharp with worry. "And keep your weapons ready, because we do not know what we will find." The team behind him was a mix of species from across the galaxy, and they moved with the careful steps of people who knew that danger waited around every corner. There were 3 Sovalian scientists with their blue skin and large eyes that could see in almost complete darkness. And there were 2 Kethrani escorts who looked like tall wolves that walked on 2 legs and carried plasma rifles that could cut through starship armor. And then there was the human DR Elena Vasquez walked at the back of the group, her brown eyes scanning everything around her with a curiosity that made Yelthin nervous. And she carried no weapon at all, because humans apparently thought that a medical kit and a smile were enough. Protection on an alien world. Yelthin had not wanted a human on his team. But the Galactic Coalition had new rules about including all member species on survey missions. And so here she was. This small, soft creature from a small, wet planet that most of the galaxy had never heard of until 50 years ago. "Commander," one of the Surveillian scientists called out, her voice trembling. "I am detecting life signs ahead, and they are large. And they are moving toward us." Yelthin raised one of his 4 hands to signal the team to stop. And everyone froze in place except for the human who took 3 more steps forward before she noticed that no one else was moving. "What is it?" Elena asked, and her voice carried no fear at all, which Yelthin found both impressive and stupid before he could answer. A sound rose from the ravine ahead of them, and it was a sound that made every non-human member of the team feel ice in their blood. It was a growl. But not just any growl, because this was the growl of a Kethra. And even the Kethrani escorts, who were distant evolutionary cousins of these beasts, took a step backward. "Fall back," Yelthin commanded, and his voice cracked because he could see them now. 3 shapes in the shadows of the ravine below. 3 cubs with fur as black as space, and 6 eyes each that glowed like dying stars. Kethra cubs were not like the babies of other species, because Kethra cubs were born hungry and born angry, and born with claws that could tear through combat armor like it was wet paper. These 3 had clearly been separated from their pack, and that made them more dangerous than a dozen adults, because a hungry, scared Kethra cub would attack anything that moved. "Everyone move now," Yelthin shouted, and his team scrambled up the ridge behind them, their feet slipping on the loose rocks as they fled. But one person did not move. Elena Vasquez stood at the edge of the ravine, her helmet tucked under her arm, her dark hair blowing in the wind. And she stared down at the growling cubs with an expression that Yelthin could not understand. "Human," he screamed at her. "Did you not hear me? Because those creatures will kill you. And they will not be quick about it. And I do not want to explain to the Coalition why I let their diversity hire get eaten on her." First mission. Elena did not look at him, and she did not move away from the edge. And instead she did something that made Yelthin's 4 hearts stop beating for a full second. She began to climb down into the ravine. "She has lost her mind," whispered Kethros, the lead Kethrani escort, and his wolf-like face showed something that might have been respect mixed with horror. Because no one goes toward a Kethra, not even us. Not even when we are armed and armored and ready to die. Yelthin wanted to look away because he did not want to watch a member of his team get torn apart. But he could not stop watching, because something about the way the human moved was strange. She did not run, and she did not creep. And she did not show any of the signs of fear that every prey species showed when facing a predator. and instead she walked slowly and steadily like she was taking a stroll through a garden on her home world. The cubs saw her coming, and their growls grew louder and deeper. And the largest one stepped forward with its lips pulled back to show teeth that were longer than human fingers. Elena stopped moving, and she stood very still. And she did something with her body that made her look smaller and less threatening. Yelthin checked his scanner and saw that his hands were shaking so badly that he could barely read the display. But what he saw made no sense at all. The cubs were still growling, but their heart rates were not climbing the way they should before an attack, and their muscles were not tensing for a killing leap. "What is she doing?" Yelthin asked, and his voice was barely a whisper. "I do not know," Kethros answered, and his yellow eyes were wide with something that looked almost like wonder. "But I have hunted Kethra for 30 years, and I have never seen anything like this." Elena lowered herself to the ground, and she sat on the cold black rocks of the ravine floor. And she placed her hands on the ground with her palms facing up. Then she began to make a sound, a soft humming that seemed to come from deep in her chest. And it was not a song exactly, but it was not just noise either. The largest cub stopped growling. The second cub sat down on its haunches. The smallest cub, the one that was barely bigger than a large dog from Earth, took one step toward the human, and then another. And then Anathirielthan held his breath as the small predator approached the small human. And he waited for the blood and the screaming and the death that was surely about to come. But the cub did not attack. Instead, it lowered its massive head and pressed it against Elena's open palm. And it made a sound that no one on the survey team had ever heard a Kethra make before. It purred, and Elena Vasquez smiled and scratched behind the deadly creature's ears like it was nothing more than a lost puppy looking for a friend. The sun on Velaris Prime was setting behind the jagged mountains, and it painted the sky in shades of orange and red that would have been beautiful if anyone had been paying attention to it. But no one was looking at the sky because everyone was looking at the impossible thing happening in the ravine below. Commander Yelthin sat on a rock at the edge of the ridge, and his forearms hung limp at his sides, and his scanner lay forgotten on the ground beside him because nothing in his training had prepared him for what he was watching. Dr. Elena Vasquez sat in the middle of 3 Kethra cubs, and the deadly beasts were pressed against her on all sides like she was the center of their world. And she was running her fingers through their black fur while humming that strange soft melody. The smallest cub had its head in her lap, and its 6 eyes were half closed with contentment. And every few seconds it made that purring sound that no Kethra had ever made before in recorded galactic history. "This cannot be real," said Dr. Seleth, the lead surveillance scientist, and her blue skin had gone pale with shock. Because Kethra cubs are the most aggressive stage of the species development, and they have killed trained Kethrani handlers who have worked with them since birth. Kethros nodded slowly, and his Wolf-like face was twisted with emotions that he could not name. And his yellow eyes never left the human in the ravine. "When I was young," he said quietly, "my father took me to see the great beast pits where we tried to train Kethra for war. And I watched 12 of our finest warriors die in a single day because a cub got loose. And that cub was half the size of the smallest one down there." He pointed at the ravine with one clawed finger. "That human female weighs less than my armor, and she has no claws and no fangs and no natural weapons of any kind. And yet, she sits among 3 wild cubs like they are her children. And I do not understand how this is possible." Yelthin finally found his voice, and it came out rough and scratchy like he had been screaming for hours. "I need to go down there," he said, and he stood up on shaking legs. "Because I need to understand what she did and how she did it." "Commander, that is extremely unwise," Dr. Seleth said quickly, "because we do not know if her control over them will extend to protecting others." But Yelthin was already picking his way down the rocky slope, and his hearts were pounding so hard that he could hear them in his ears. And every step felt like it might be his last. The cubs noticed him immediately, and the largest one lifted its head and fixed him with 6 glowing eyes. And a growl started deep in its chest. The elephant froze in place and felt his body prepare to run, even though he knew that running from a Kethra was the same as asking to be chased down and killed. "Stop moving," Elena called to him, and her voice was calm and steady. "And lower your body so you look smaller, and do not look directly at them, because they see that as a challenge." Yelthin did as she said, and he crouched down and turned his eyes to the ground. And the growling slowly faded away. "Good," Elena said. "Now move toward me very slowly, and keep your movements smooth and predictable. And do not make any sudden gestures with your arms." It took Yelthin 5 minutes to cross the 20 meters between them. And by the time he reached her, his legs were burning from holding the uncomfortable crouch. But he was alive, and he was close enough to see the details he had missed from above. The cubs were not just tolerating the human, they were actively seeking her touch. And when she stopped petting one of them, it would nudge her hand with its massive head until she started again. "How?" Yelthin asked. And that one word contained 1,000 questions. Elena smiled at him. And it was a warm smile with no fear or pride in it. Just simple happiness. "I spoke their language," she said. "Not with words, but with my body and my breath and my patience. But you are human," Yelthin said. And the confusion in his voice was obvious. "And humans have only been in space for 50 of your years, and you have no history with Kethra. And you have no evolutionary connection to them at all." Elena nodded and continued to stroke the smallest cub's fur. "That is true," she admitted. "But we have a very long history with creatures like them, because Earth was full of predators that were bigger and faster and stronger than us. And we should have been nothing but food for them. Then how did your species survive?" Yelthin asked. "We made friends with them," Elena said simply. Yelthin stared at her because surely he had misunderstood her words. "You made friends with predators," he repeated slowly. "With creatures that wanted to eat you." "Yes," Elena said. "And it took us a very long time to learn how to do it. But we figured out that most predators do not actually want to fight if they do not have to, because fighting is dangerous, even for the winner. And so if you can show them that you are not a threat and not a meal, and maybe even useful to have around, then sometimes they will accept you." She scratched behind the largest cub's ears, and it closed all 6 of its eyes with pleasure. "We did it with wolves first," she continued. "And that took thousands of years of slow, careful work. But eventually, the wolves started to trust us, and then they started to help us hunt. And then they started to live with us and protect our families. And now we call them dogs, and they are our best friends in the whole universe." Yelthin felt something shift in his understanding of humans, and he was not sure if it was respect or fear or something else entirely. "Your species looked at the things that could kill you," he said slowly. "And instead of running or fighting, you tried to make them love you." Elena laughed softly, and the sound made the cubs perk up their ears. "When you say it like that, it sounds crazy," she admitted. "But it worked, and we did it over and over again with horses and elephants and even some cats. And now it is just part of who we are. Because every human child grows up knowing that sometimes the scary thing just needs a friend." She looked at Yelthin with those strange, soft human eyes. "These cubs are alone and scared and hungry," she said. "And they have been growling and snapping at everything because that is all they know how to do. But what they really wanted was someone to tell them that everything is going to be okay." Yelthin looked at the 3 deadly predators curled around this small, fragile human, and he realized that his understanding of the galaxy had just changed forever. 3 days had passed since the impossible thing in the ravine, and the survey team had set up a small camp on the ridge above, because no one wanted to leave, and no one could explain why the Kethra cubs had not wandered away. and they had not returned to their feral aggression. And instead, they stayed close to Elena like she was the most important thing in their world. Every morning, she would wake up buried under a pile of black fur and glowing eyes. And every night, she would fall asleep with 3 massive heads resting on her legs and stomach. And Yelthin had stopped being surprised by any of it. What he could not stop doing was asking questions. "Tell me more about this domestication," he said on the third evening as the team sat around a portable heating unit and watched Elena play with the cubs in the fading light. She was throwing a piece of equipment casing across the ground, and the smallest cub would chase it and bring it back to her. And then she would throw it again, and the cub would chase it again. And both of them seemed to find this endlessly entertaining. "What do you want to know?" Elena called back without looking away from the game. "Everything," Yelthin said. "Because I have studied hundreds of species across dozens of worlds, and I have never encountered anything like what your people have done." Elena threw the casing one more time and then walked over to join the group. And the cubs followed her like shadows and settled around her feet when she sat down. It started with wolves. She began about 40,000 years ago. Or at least that is what we think, because we do not have perfect records from that time. She reached down and scratched one of the cubs behind its ears, and it leaned into her touch with obvious pleasure. "Wolves were our biggest competitors back then," she continued, "because they were pack hunters like us, and they wanted the same prey we wanted. And they were faster and stronger, and had better senses than we did. So you killed them," Kethro said, "because that was the obvious answer that any hunter would give." "Some of us tried," Elena admitted. "But wolves are hard to kill when they work together. And for every wolf we killed, there were more to take its place. And the war between our species could have gone on forever." She paused and looked up at the stars that were starting to appear in the darkening sky. "But some humans noticed something interesting," she said, "because some wolves were less aggressive than others. And some wolves would actually approach our camps to eat the scraps we left behind. And those wolves were not trying to attack us. They were just hungry, and you fed them." Dr. Sella said with disbelief in her voice. "We fed them," Elena confirmed. "And we did not chase them away. And over time, they started to understand that staying near humans meant easy food and safety from other predators." She smiled at the memory of a history she had not lived, but had learned about since she was a small child. "And then something amazing happened," she said, "because the wolves started helping us hunt. And they would track prey that we could not smell and corner animals that we could not catch. And suddenly, we were not competitors anymore. We were partners." "But they were still predators," Yelthin protested. "And they still had teeth and claws. And they could have turned on you at any moment." "They could have," Elena agreed. "But they did not, because we had built something with them that was stronger than instinct. And we call it trust." She looked around at the alien faces watching her, and she saw confusion and doubt and fear and wonder all mixed together. "Every species in this galaxy evolved in one of 2 ways," she said. "Because either you became a predator that killed everything weaker than you, or you became prey that ran from everything stronger than you. And both of those strategies work well enough to survive." She gestured at herself with one hand. "Humans are not very good predators," she admitted, "because we are slow and weak, and we do not have sharp teeth or claws. And we are not very good prey either, because we cannot run fast enough to escape most hunters." "Then how did you survive at all?" Kethros asked. "We found a third way," Elena said. "Because instead of fighting or running, we reached out. And we offered something that no other species had ever thought to offer." "What?" Yelthin asked. "Friendship," Elena said simply. "And it sounds foolish when I say it out loud, but it worked. Because it turns out that most creatures in the universe are lonely, and most creatures want connection. And most creatures will choose companionship over conflict if you give them the chance." The largest cub lifted its head and made a soft rumbling sound. And Elena reached over to stroke its fur. We did it with wolves and then with horses and cattle and sheep and goats. She continued. And we did it with cats and elephants and birds and even some fish. And by the time we developed technology, we were not alone anymore. We were surrounded by species that had chosen to be our partners. Dr. Seleth leaned forward with scientific curiosity burning in her large eyes. But those were all species from your own planet, she said. And they shared millions of years of evolution with you. And these Kethra are completely alien to your biology. Elena nodded slowly. That is true, she said. But the language of fear and trust and comfort is older than any one planet. Because every creature that has ever lived has felt scared, and every creature that has ever lived has wanted to feel safe. She looked down at the cubs that surrounded her. These three lost their pack, she said softly. And they were alone in a universe that seemed dangerous and hostile. And every other creature they met either ran away from them or tried to hurt them. Her voice grew even softer. And then I came along, she said. And I did not run, and I did not attack. And I showed them that I understood their fear. And I offered them the one thing no one else had ever offered them. What was that? Yelthin asked. Elena smiled. And there was something ancient and powerful in that smile. I sat down with them, she said. And I told them without words that they were not alone anymore. The smallest cub crawled into her lap. And it was far too big to fit there comfortably, but it tried anyway. And Elena laughed and wrapped her arms around it like it was the most natural thing in the world. That is what humans do, she said. Because we are the species that looks at the monsters in the dark and thinks maybe they just need a hub, and somewhere in the distant mountains. A howl echoed through the night, and everyone except Elena felt their blood run cold. The howl came again, closer this time, and the cubs immediately lifted their heads and perked up their ears. And their 6 eyes glowed brighter than Yelthin had ever seen them glow before. That is a pack call, Kethra said. And his voice was tight with fear. And it is not just one adult, it is many. And they are coming this way. The ground beneath them began to vibrate with the footsteps of something massive. And then something even more massive. And then the vibrations became so strong that loose rocks started rolling down the slopes around them. Everyone to this shuttle, Yelthin commanded. And his team scrambled to their feet and started running toward the landing site, 1/2 kilometer away. But Elena did not move. She stood slowly and placed her hands on the heads of the cubs beside her. And she looked out into the darkness where the sounds were coming from. And her face showed no fear at all. Dr. Vasquez, Yelthin shouted. We need to leave now because a Kethra pack can run faster than our shuttle can take off. And if they catch us on the ground, we are all dead. They are not coming for us, Elena said calmly. They are coming for their children, as if her words had summoned them. The adult Kethra emerged from the darkness, like nightmares made flesh. There were 7 of them, each one the size of a small transport vehicle. And their black fur rippled with muscles that could tear through metal. And their 6 eyes blazed with a light that seemed to come from somewhere beyond the physical world. The largest one stepped forward, and Yelthin realized it was a female. A matriarch with scars crossing her face and body that spoke of 100 battles. Her growl was not like the growls of the cubs, because this was a sound that reached into the deepest parts of the brain and triggered fear so primal that even the bravest warrior would feel the urge to curl up and hide. Kethros fell to his knees, and his plasma rifle clattered from his shaking hands, and tears streamed down his wolf-like face. I cannot move, he whispered, because my body will not obey me. Because that sound is death itself. The other team members were similarly frozen, some standing and some fallen, and all of them trapped in a terror that went beyond thought or reason only. Elena remained standing and calm. She walked toward the matriarch, and each step she took seemed impossible. And Yelthin wanted to scream at her to stop, but his mouth would not work. The matriarch fixed her 6 burning eyes on this tiny creature approaching her, and her growl deepened into something that shook the air itself, and her lips pulled back to reveal teeth that were longer than Elena's forearm. Elena stopped 10 meters away from the massive predator, and she stood very still, and she did something that Yelthin would remember for the rest of his life. She bowed her head and turned it slightly to the side, exposing her throat to the creature that could kill her with a single bite. The growling stopped. The matriarch took 1 step forward and then another, and her movements were curious now instead of aggressive, and her massive head lowered until it was level with Elena's chest behind Elena. The cubs came running forward with excited yips and cries, and they circled their mother with obvious joy, and they pressed against her legs and rubbed their faces against her fur, and they kept looking back at Elena. Yelthin watched as the cubs communicated with their mother in ways he could not understand, through scent and posture and small sounds that carried meaning beyond words. And he saw the matriarch's eyes change as she listened to what they were telling her. The cubs were saying that this strange, soft creature had protected them. They were saying that she had fed them and warmed them and kept them safe. They were saying that she had not run from them and had not attacked them and had not treated them like monsters. They were saying that she was Pack. The matriarch raised her head and looked at Elena for a long moment, and something passed between them that transcended species and evolution and everything that the galaxy thought it knew about the boundaries between life forms. Then, the matriarch did something that no Kethra had ever done to any creature outside their own kind. She stepped forward and pressed her enormous head against Elena's chest, right above her heart, and she made a sound that was not a growl and not a roar, but something softer and deeper. It was acceptance. Elena raised her hands and placed them on either side of the matriarch's face, and she leaned forward until her forehead touched the massive predator's snout, and she whispered words that no one else could hear. The other adults in the pack watched this moment with their glowing eyes, and one by one they lowered their heads in recognition of what their matriarch had done. The human was Pack. Now Yelthin finally found the strength to move, and he stumbled toward Elena on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. And when he reached her, he could only stare in disbelief. "She accepted you," he said, and his voice cracked on every word. Elena turned to look at him, and her eyes were wet with tears, but she was smiling. "She understood," Elena said, "because I showed her that I had protected her children when they needed protecting. And that is something that any mother in any galaxy can understand." The matriarch lifted her head and made a sound that echoed across the mountains. And it was not a hunting call or a war cry, but something else entirely. It was an announcement, and every creature for kilometers around heard it and understood that the pack had grown by one, and that the new member was small and strange and unlike anything that ever been accepted before. But she was Pack all the same, and Pack was everything. 6 months had passed since the events on Velor's Prime, and Commander Yelthin sat in his office on Station Karath, staring at the message on his screen with all 4 of his hands clenched into fists. Message was from the Galactic Council's review board, and it contained their official response to his mission report. And the response made him want to throw his computer through the window. Insufficient evidence to support claims of human-Kethra bonding, he read aloud with disgust in his voice, and recommends psychological evaluation for Commander Yelthin and all crew members who signed supporting statements. He had submitted over 200 hours of video footage and thousands of biometric readings and detailed testimony from every member of his team, and the council had dismissed all of it as a hoax or a hallucination or mass hysteria caused by exposure to unknown atmospheric compounds. The Kethrani ambassador had been particularly insulting, calling the report an attempt to humiliate his species by suggesting that soft, helpless humans could do what trained Kethrani warriors could not. Ielthan had wanted to drag the ambassador to Velaris Prime and show him the truth. But by the time the political arguments had finished, Elena had already returned to the planet on her own. She had resigned from the Galactic Survey Corps 2 weeks after the pack accepted her, and she had used her personal savings to buy a small habitat module. And she had set it up in the valley where the Kethra roamed. The last message Ielthan had received from her had included a photo of her sitting outside her habitat at sunset, surrounded by 4 cubs and 2 adults, and she had looked happier than any human he had ever seen. He pulled up that photo now and stared at it, and he felt something shift in his chest that might have been hoping a knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. And he looked up to see Kethra standing in the doorway with an expression that mixed nervousness and excitement. "Commander," the Kethrani said, "there is something you need to see on the news feeds." Ielthan followed him to the common room where the rest of his former team had already gathered around a large display screen. And what he saw made him stop walking and stare. The screen showed a live feed from Velaris Prime, and the image was being broadcast across the entire galactic network. And it showed something that the Council's review board had said was impossible. Lena Vasquez stood in an open field surrounded by not 1 Kethra pack but 3. And the massive predators moved around her like she was the center of their universe. And she was reaching up to touch the face of a scarred matriarch while 2 other matriarchs waited their turn as reporters. Voice narrated over the footage. "What you are seeing has been verified by 17 independent observation teams," the reporter said. "And it has forced the Galactic Council to reverse their previous statements regarding human-Kethra relations." The image changed to show Elena walking through a forest with a dozen cubs tumbling around her feet. And she was laughing and playing with them like they were puppies instead of deadly predators. Dr. Elena Vasquez has become the first non-Kethra being to be fully accepted by multiple packs, the reporter continued. And scientists across the galaxy are scrambling to understand how this is possible. The image changed again to show a council chamber where serious-looking representatives of dozens of species argued with each other. And the caption at the bottom of the screen read, "Emergency session called to discuss human domestication abilities. The implications of this discovery are still being debated," the reporter said. "But some experts are suggesting that humans possess a unique evolutionary trait that allows them to form bonds with species that should be their natural enemies." These elves made a sound that was half laugh and half sob. "They finally believe us," she said. "After all this time, they finally believe us." But Ielthan was not looking at the screen anymore, because he was looking at the door where a new figure had just appeared. It was a human, a young man in a courier uniform, and he carried a package that he handed to Ielthan with a nervous smile. "Delivery from Velaris Prime," the courier said. "From a Dr. Vasquez." Ielthan opened the package with trembling hands, and inside he found a small data chip and a handwritten note on actual paper, which was something he had never seen a human use before. The note said, "Dear Commander Ielthan, I hope this message finds you well, and I hope you are not too frustrated with the Council, because they will understand eventually, and sometimes understanding takes time. I am sending you this data chip because it contains everything I have learned about communicating with Kethra, and I want you to share it with anyone who wants to learn, especially the Kethrani, because I think they have been trying to connect with their cousins for a long time, and they just did not know how. The secret is not complicated, and it is not magic, and it does not require any special human ability. The secret is just patience and respect and the willingness to see another creature as something more than a threat or a tool. Every being in this universe wants to be understood, and every being in this universe wants to feel safe, and if you can offer those think sincerely, then you have taken the first step toward friendship. I do not know if humans are special, or if we just figured this out earlier than everyone else, but I do know that what we can do is not unique to us. And anyone can learn it if they are willing to try. Tell the galaxy that the monsters are not as monstrous as they seem. And tell them that the beast just needs someone to reach out first. And tell them that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is not fight and not run, but simply kneel down and offer your hand with hope for the future. Elena, Yelthin read the note 3 times. And then he looked up at the screen where Elena was now shown riding on the back of a massive Kethra as it ran across an open plain. And her face was bright with joy. She changed everything, Kethra said softly. And she did it by sitting down with the things that scared us. Yelthin nodded and carefully folded the note and placed it in his pocket, where he would keep it for the rest of his life. That is what humans do, he said, because they are the species that looks at monsters and sees friends on the screen. Elena raised one hand and waved at the camera, and behind her a dozen Kethra lifted their heads and howled at the sky. It was not a sound of hunting or war. It was a sound of welcoming across the galaxy. Millions of beings watched and wondered if perhaps they had been wrong about everything they thought they knew about fear and friendship and the strange, soft creatures from the small wet planet called Earth.